What I'm going to do is focus on the first part of the gospel because it's really coupled with the first reading. They say one of the oldest military principles is divide and conquer. Right? If you want to defeat your enemy, the best thing to do is to set him against himself. Divide your enemy, then you can conquer him much more easily. Remember in the Tolkien movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, those fearsome orcs, those terrible warriors, who actually were very ineffectual because they were always bickering among themselves. All you had to do was wait around long enough and the orcs would kill each other. They were at war with themselves. Well, this obtains too at the spiritual level. The enemy of the church, his favorite thing to do is to divide us against ourselves, to sow dissension among the followers of Christ. You know, the Bible knows all about this principle. Go back to the first book of Samuel. The story of the struggle between Saul and David is very instructive. Here's King Saul, the anointed of the Lord, doing the work of the Lord, fighting the good fight. And along comes David. David, who's young and handsome and courageous and very effective on the battlefield. Soon we hear the women are singing, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And right away, Saul becomes jealous of David. David, mind you, is on his side, fighting his fight with him, but yet Saul burns with jealousy. So intense, he tries to kill David. When David escapes, Saul pursues him with his army, and for years, Israel is in a civil war. Israel's mission is compromised because David and Saul are fighting incessantly with each other. The favorite trick of the enemy of the church is to divide us against ourselves. Now, look at our first reading from the book of Numbers. It's a wonderful little text, worthy of serious reflection. We hear that Moses, who's been leading the people very effectively, but now they're in the desert. He's been doing it for a long time, he's getting older, and he needs some help in leading the community. So the Lord takes some of the Spirit from Moses and puts it into these 70 elders. Okay. It's pretty clear from the reading that some sort of liturgy was involved, some sort of official gathering of the 70 who would then receive the Spirit of the Lord. And we hear that indeed it comes upon them, they begin to prophesy. It's the Bible's way of saying they're now filled up with the Spirit of the Lord. Now, it appears that two figures, and the Bible names them, Eldad and Medad, were on the list. We hear they were supposed to be there for the liturgy, for this official meeting, but they didn't show up. We don't know why. They were sick, or they forgot about it, or who knows. They didn't show up at the official gathering. Nevertheless, they receive the Spirit of the Lord. And they begin to prophesy as well. And then, it's such a beautiful thing because we can recognize ourselves in it, can't we? The hinge of the story. There's a young man. And it's important that he's young, probably ambitious. Imagine you're in this little community and Moses, the great Moses, they're sharing some of his power. And if you're one of the 70, you're a very special character. They're all going to be talking about you. They're all going to be noticing you. You're one of the leaders of the community. So this young, ambitious guy is not happy because he went to the meeting, he went to the liturgy, he was there, but these other two, Eldad and Medad, who do they think they are? They didn't even show up, and yet they get the Spirit of the Lord. What gives? And he goes to Joshua, to the number 2 guy, Moses' right-hand man. He complains to him. And Joshua listens to him. Joshua agrees with him. And they both go to Moses and they complain. How could you allow this to happen? And then that beautiful, liberating word from Moses. You jealous for my sake? Would that all the people were prophets. Who am I to limit the grace of God? Would that they all receive the gift of the Lord. See, friends, here's where it applies to us. This is a very old game. It's a very old problem. The spiritual life is really about one thing. It's about our cooperation with grace. That's good Catholic language, and it's a way to sum up the spiritual life. Grace, God's love, is surging into the world at all times. According to God's purposes, it's God's will. Our job is pretty simple. It's to notice it, and once we notice it, to cooperate with it. Get on board with it. Cooperate. Whether that grace is coming directly to me or to somebody else. Whether it's according to my expectations or outside my expectations. Whether it's according to my bureaucratic structures or outside of my bureaucratic structures. Wherever it appears, get on board. Cooperate with it. What gets in the way? The ego. The power of sin gets in the way. I become more interested in my perks, my prerogative, my position, who's noticing me. You know what happens? When the ego takes over, the flow of grace is blocked. That's the central tragedy of sin. God's love wants to surge into the world, but He gives us the privilege of cooperating with it. But we can block it if we make our own ego central. That's the trouble here in this first reading. Now, look how beautifully it's echoed in the gospel. That's why the church juxtaposes these two readings. So, Jesus, this charismatic rabbi, the one being declared as the Messiah of Israel, has gathered around him his 12, evocative of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's given them special access, special intimacy, indeed special powers as he sends them out to proclaim the kingdom and to drive out demons. Well, let's face it, if you're one of these 12, that must have been pretty heady stuff. That you're in that intimate connection with this highly charismatic figure. You're expecting when he comes into power, you'll be his right-hand man. How interesting now, as this gospel begins, it's John who complains to Jesus about these outsiders, people not in the inner circle, who nevertheless are using Jesus' name to expel demons. John, by tradition, the youngest of the disciples. In other stories, too, John's ambition becomes clear, that he wants to be one of the top leaders when Jesus comes into his kingdom. So this young, ambitious man in the New Testament, just like the young, ambitious man in the Old, comes to Jesus and says, make them stop. They're not in our group. Well, see, what's he saying? It's his own ego now is blocking him. He's more concerned about his prerogative, his position, his privilege, than with the flow of grace. Here are people who are being cured. They're being spiritually liberated right before his eyes. Does he notice it? Does he rejoice in it? Or does he turn inward and resent it? See, that's the spiritual hinge of these stories. That's the lesson we're meant to see. The ego blocks, and then we get divided against ourselves.